Hi everyone, my name is Amber. Welcome back to my channel. Sorry, I just kicked my tripod. This is my February wrap up. So February was obviously the shortest month of the year and I had big plans for it. I managed to complete most of those plans, but I did get a little bit sidetracked and my TBR didn't go exactly to plan. It's currently the last weekend of February. It's not quite March yet, so I do have a couple of books that I still want to read. I'm in the middle of 4, and so I'm going to start by telling you which books I'm currently in the middle of. I'm going to then tell you which books I actually read and to give you my thoughts and feelings on them, and then we're going to get into the stats, which aren't going to be too in-depth, but I enjoy talking about stats, so I'm going to give a brief overview before I do my quarterly wrap-up next month. So these are the 4 books that I am currently in the middle of for various reasons. Some of them I just couldn't really get into at the time, and others I have been reading very slowly throughout the month and I still haven't finished. The first one is Age of Myth. This is one that took me forever to actually find, and I was going to take part in Joshana's buddy read for this series, except I've now fallen behind. She actually posted the live show for the first book quite early on in the month, I think in the 3rd week, and I just wasn't ready for that, so I then put off reading it because I hadn't finished the book, and now I'm just kind of like partway through, so I need to carry on with it. I was really enjoying it. I've only read the first couple of chapters, but I can say that it's very well written, and yeah, I'm definitely enjoying the book. It's an adult fantasy book about a world in which the gods can be killed, so people start questioning whether or not they're actually gods or deities because, you know, they're killable. I'm also in the middle of Black Tudors, which is a non-fiction book about black people who were around in Tudor Britain, because there is a common misconception about how black people only came from Africa to Britain during the slave trade, but it was actually happening hundreds of years before then, partly because of other countries that were enslaving people, but also partly because of migration and other such things. So yeah, I'm really enjoying this one. I've been reading it 1 chapter per day each month because it's a non-fiction book. I didn't want to read it all at once, and it focuses on, I think, perhaps 10 different prominent black people around the Tudor period. So for example, the first one is a trumpeter for Henry VII or Henry VIII, and another one is a person who was hired to dive to kind of rescue the Mary Rose and kind of salvage the guns and things. So yeah, I'm really enjoying this one. I'm going to finish it today. I'm also in the middle of Stolen, which is the 2nd book in the Women of the Other World. I was meant to read this in January, but I kept putting it off because I don't really like the main character for this one. But this is the book that kind of, in this series, expands the world building, and we get introduced to other creatures that aren't just werewolves, and so this is kind of the stepping stone into a larger Women of the Other World universe. And so I do want to finish this one off maybe at the beginning of March, because it's very slow going so far, especially because I don't really like the main character and her love interest, so it's not massively gripping me. And the next one that I'm in the middle of is one that I've only really just started, and that is A Memory Called Empire. This is the book for the Space Sirens book club that's being discussed at the beginning of March, I think. I can't remember if we've chosen an exact date, but I know that it's not the first weekend, so I do have a bit more time to finish this one off, and that's why I left this one until the end of the month, because I want it to be fresh in my mind for the live show. So this one is about a woman who goes to a different planet, I think, to work as an ambassador, and she's trying to figure out where or what happened to her predecessor who has gone missing or who has been killed. I'm enjoying it so far, but I'm not very far through. So now on to the books that I've actually finished. The first one I'm going to talk about is the only audiobook I've read so far this year, because I've been struggling to listen to audiobooks, but I have taken up running again, so I've been listening to the books as I've been running, and that is called The History of Everyone Who Ever Lived. Sorry, no, A Brief History of Everyone Who Ever Lived. And this one is about, it's non-fiction, it's about the history of everyone who ever lived. So basically it talks about DNA. It starts off with the human Homo sapiens versus the Neanderthals, and then it carries on through to how everyone in Europe is pretty much related, and is probably related to royalty, because the further back you go, the more kind of interconnections happen. Not necessarily inbreeding, but everyone is related if you go far back enough. And then also it talks about how people in Asia are all related. I'm not explaining it very well, but it was very, very interesting. It also talks about genetic mutations and things like hard and soft earwax. It's very interesting to me. I really enjoy reading about genes, biology, DNA, so I really enjoyed this one. I gave it 4 stars. I also just finished reading a thriller called Every Last Sphere, which came out yesterday as you're watching this, and I did enjoy this one. I just need to talk to someone about it before I record record my review because I have some mixed feelings on it. I know that quite a few people were very displeased with how the author portrayed Mexican people, or how the author talked about Mexican people, which is understandable. And what this book is about is a college boy called Matt. His entire family is killed, and apart from his brother, who is in prison for life because he murdered someone, but the family were actually trying to get Danny, the brother, pardoned because they don't think he did it. And there is kind of no evidence to support the fact that he did it. He just confessed because he was a teenager and the police kind of interrogated him to make it out that way. So Matt's entire family dies bar Danny, and the FBI start looking into it, and it's told from multiple different points of views, and it goes back to talk about the before times, before the family died, and we get their perspectives and what led up to their deaths. And I thought it was really well told. I really enjoyed that. It was partly based in Mexico because that's where something bad is happening. I did find that kind of portrayal, or that setting, to be very, I can't remember the word, stereotypical almost. I feel like the characters only went to Mexico because that's where, you know, all the bad people go, and where the drug dealers are and hired killers and the prostitutes and things like that. And I just didn't really like that. And I also didn't really like the twist, which I did see coming, but I enjoyed that. I enjoyed it up to a point because I did manage to figure it out and the kind of clues were all there. But the way that the twist was told and the reason behind the twist, I'm being quite vague here, was not great, and it didn't really sit well with me. So yeah, I want to talk to someone about that before I post a full review, because I'm not really sure how to rate this book, because while I did enjoy the plot and the writing style, I didn't like some elements of it. So my rating is kind of all over the place at the moment. But yeah, that's how I feel about that one. I then read a bunch of Kristin Hannah books, and I've done a whole video on these books, and you can see my full feelings in that video, so I'm not going to talk too much about them here. I will leave the link up above so you can check it out if you want to. But I read The Nightingale, The Great Alone, and Firefly Lane, which has recently been turned into a Netflix show. I really enjoyed them. I gave them all 4 stars. Oh, I also read The Four Winds as well, which I also gave 4 stars. And yeah, I really enjoyed them. They're very emotional. Firefly Lane is about 2 best friends called Kate and Tully, and it follows them throughout their lives, kind of as they get into the same career and then slowly drift apart because other things are happening. It talks about how the 2 friends treat each other and how things get in the way, but ultimately they are always there for one another. And this one made me sob. It was really, really good. It's the first Kristin Hannah book that I read, and it made me cry so much. The Nightingale is set during World War II. It's based in France as it's being occupied by the Nazi soldiers, and it's about 2 sisters, one who stays in her hometown and the other who goes to fight for the resistance. This is a very dark book, much darker than Firefly Lane, and I really enjoyed it. I didn't cry quite as much as I did during Firefly Lane, but I think that's because this one sort of like drained me because it was just so dark and emotional, but I did really enjoy it. My favourite one out of the 4 was The Great Alone, which is about a young girl who's a teenager called Lenny. Yes, Lenny, and she and her family go to Alaska, and her dad is suffering from PTSD after fighting or being a prisoner in the Vietnam War. They go off to Alaska to kind of live off the land and start a new life, and her dad is abusive. He starts getting really involved in kind of the end of the world sort of conspiracy theories and building fences and bombs and all sorts. I did really enjoy this one. Like I said, it was my favourite of Kristin Hannah's. I gave it 4 stars. It's very emotional, but the domestic abuse in it was very, very difficult for me to read. So while I was reading it, I didn't actually realise this was going to be my favourite book because I was really struggling through it. But I did really, really enjoy the book. And I also read The Four Winds, which is her latest book, which came out at the beginning of February. I received this one in exchange for an honest review. This one is about a woman called Elsa who marries into an Italian family because she becomes pregnant, and she starts working on their farm in the south. It's based in Texas initially. Then the Great Depression happens, the south starts to go through a drought, and there's not really anything there for them. The grandparents stay behind, and Elsa takes her kids to go to California because that's where the government have said there's a ton of work on farms there, you can get a job no problem and have a really good life out there. But the locals aren't really too keen. They think that people are coming and taking all the jobs, and they also think that the people coming from across the country are dirty and poor and just awful, and they treat them really horribly. And the Great Depression era and this whole migration to California, to the west, isn't something that I have read much about before, but I'm definitely intrigued now, and I might try to find out if there are any good non-fiction books about that time period and about that migration specifically, because I do think it's a really interesting topic. So I gave this one 4 stars as well. And then I also read a bunch of NetGalley books. I obviously received all of these in exchange for an honest review from the publishers. It wasn't just NetGalley actually, I got one from EW, but that's not really that important. I've actually done a whole vlog on this, and you should have seen it on Monday as I'm posting this, so go and check that out for my full thoughts, but I'm just going to go through them really quickly here. The first one that I read was A Song for the Wild Bill by Becky Chambers. This is her latest book. It's coming out in July and I just couldn't wait to read it. It's a tall novella and it's about a tea monk who travels around the country and listens to people's problems. He then comes across a robot, and the robots years ago gained sentience and they just kind of left, and no one knows where they went. They didn't want to work for the humans anymore. The humans felt very uncomfortable working with them because they were now sentient. So yeah, they left, and then the robot comes back, runs into the tea monk, and they start learning about each other, and it's actually a really nice story. I did think it was a little bit slow to begin with, so I only gave it 4 stars because of that, but I'm very much looking forward to rereading it closer to the time of the release, and then also hopefully reading the second book when it comes out. I know that Becky Chambers has just submitted it for, I don't know, editing, I guess, submitted the final version. She spoke about this in one of her interviews, and so hopefully that should be coming next year, maybe. I also read The Lodge, which I gave 1 star. This is a horror book set in the Scottish Highlands. I think it might be self-published or indie published, and this is about a police officer who obviously works in the Scottish Highlands. He receives a phone call around Christmas while he's kind of working the graveyard shift as like the skeleton crew, and he gets a call from a B&B saying there has been a death. So he drives over there immediately, goes to check it out, and then weird things start happening. I thought this was so poorly written. The writing was kind of juvenile for one thing. There were tons of like exclamation marks within the text, and then it was also very choppy because we were just getting introduced to the characters in present day, then all of a sudden it would switch to kind of like a biography in italics about each of the characters in turn. That just went on for ages and it was a weird info dump. It was a really strange decision by the author, but yeah, I didn't enjoy this one, so I gave it 1 star. I read Game Changer by Neil Schusterman. This is the book that I got from EW, and this one is a YA science fiction book about a boy who's a footballer. He gets kicked in the head and then is able to travel through multiple dimensions, and each parallel universe that he kind of gets shifted into is slightly different to the one before, so he spends his time trying to get back to the original timeline because that's apparently where it's better, even though that's also not very good. So this tackles a lot of things, including kind of segregation, racism, poverty, and all sorts, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. I think Neil Schusterman did a good job. I do think it was a bit in your face, but sometimes with teen YA books I do find that the symbolism isn't really symbolism at this point, or the themes are very in your face, because while teens aren't stupid, I do find that sometimes it's just better to kind of just, you know, get it all out there instead of trying to be subtle with it. So that was the case for this one. I think maybe older readers probably wouldn't enjoy it so much. They would think it's very over the top. At least that's what I've seen from the Goodreads reviews, but I do think Neil Schusterman did a good job with this one. It was a very enjoyable book. I read Quiet in Her Bones by Nalini Singh, which I gave 2 stars. Nalini Singh is a paranormal romance author who I have read a lot from, and I really enjoy her Side Changelings series. She writes really good romances, I think, about shapeshifters, but this is the first thriller I read by her. She also wrote another one called A Madness of Sunshine, but this is her second thriller, and it was just so dull. The main character was quite whiny. I didn't enjoy him, and I do think he had a good reason to be whiny because his dead mum had just been found, but I just didn't really enjoy that all that much, and that kind of put me off in the beginning. And then the beginning was also really slow, and there was a lot of backstory about the family and about the mother, and it just dragged on for ages, and I just wanted to get to the thrilling elements and the murder mystery, but it just went on forever. So yeah, 2 stars for this one. I also read The 9 Lives of Rose Napolitano. I think I keep stumbling over it, so I will put the cover here obviously. This one is about a woman called Rose who really doesn't want to be a mother. She doesn't want kids, and her husband knew this when he married her, when they got together, and then he changes his mind. He decides that he does want a child, and he has done for a while, so he approaches the subject with his wife, and that's when the story kind of splits off into different timelines, and we see Rose in different situations, such as definitely not wanting kids, possibly wanting kids, agreeing to have kids with her husband, not wanting to have kids, but also lying to her husband, and things like that. And there were 9 different scenarios, and I did find it all very interesting. I loved the timey-wimey stuff and the parallel universe stuff in that respect, but I didn't really like the main character. I just found her a bit bland, and I found it very difficult to relate to her, probably because we're not kind of in the same stage of our lives at the moment. I talk about this more in my NetGalley vlog, so go and check that out if you want to. I gave this one 3 stars. I also read a couple of Becky Chambers books. The first one is actually one that I read in January, but I recorded my January wrap up too quickly and I didn't get to talk about it. So this is Record of a Spaceborne Few. This is the 3rd book in the Wayfarer series. This was a reread for me, and I loved it just as much as I did the first time. Gave it 5 stars. It's incredible. This one is space opera science fiction, and it focuses on the human exodus fleet. So humans in this world left Earth two different ways. Some went to Mars and various other planets in our current solar system, and some had to leave Earth because it was dying. They got onto a ship and then travelled for hundreds of years. Obviously, generations later, they were discovered by other sapiens, which are sentient beings, and they joined the Galactic Commons. And this is set on the Exodus fleet, the original ship that left Earth, and it talks about how the humans have adapted and how they all have to be really nice to one another, basically, because they had to be. Like, there was no escaping each other on this Exodus fleet as they were traveling, so everyone had to kind of trade and be generous and just be really kind. I love this book so much. I can't recommend it enough. If you're going to start anywhere with this series, I would recommend starting with The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, but if you want to start here, this is also a really good starting point. I also read The Galaxy and the Ground Within. I've actually done a whole video on ranking the Becky Chambers Wayfarers books, so I'll leave that linked up above as well in case you want to check it out. So The Galaxy and the Ground Within is based in the same world, and it focuses on only one character who we have met before, and that is Pei. And what's really interesting about The Galaxy and the Ground Within is that none of the characters are humans. They're all different kinds of sapiens, and it's basically kind of a story about what would happen if there was a disaster and all of these people were trapped in a B&B together, basically, and they had to just talk to one another and get along. And there is a bit of a plot, and it's quite dramatic at points and quite worrying, but it's not the most action-packed book. None of her books are. This one is again about the relationships between different sapiens and with their own families and things like that, and I loved it. I gave it 5 stars as well. I went on a bit of a Brandon Sanderson binge as well in February, so I finished off The Bands of Morning finally, and yeah, I gave this one 3 stars. This is the 6th book in the Mistborn series, and this is part 3 of the new era. I don't really like it. It's okay, but I don't really like the characters. I don't really like Brandon Sanderson's humour in this. I don't really love it. So I only read this because I want to carry on with the Mistborn series, and I also was very excited because the ending had been spoiled for me. I'm not going to say what it was, but it's really annoying when people talk about a certain character coming back on Twitter, because if you haven't read this book, then you're going to be spoiled, and please don't do that on Twitter. It's really quite frustrating. But that is also probably the only thing that kept me reading this series, and it's the only reason I want to carry on with it. I love the original Mistborn trilogy, but this new era is just really quite boring to me. I then read 3 of his novellas. I read The 11th Metal, which is a Kelsier prequel to Mistborn 1. I read Alamancer Jack, which is, I think, set in the Era 2 times, I think. I didn't really get much out of that one. I gave both of those novellas 3 stars. And then I read Secret History, which I loved. I had heard it's really good for fans of a certain character who I'm not going to name because, again, that really spoiled me. And I gave this one 4 stars because I loved it and I would definitely reread it again. I would say that you have to finish Bands of Morning first if you're going to carry on with the Mistborn 2nd era, but you could also read it after Hero of Ages if you're just content with the original trilogy, I think. Another NetGalley book I read just separately of my vlog was The Other Black Girl, which is coming out in June, I think. This is about a black woman who is the only black woman in her publishing house. She's the only black editor there. One day another black woman arrives, and then it's also a thriller mystery element, and well, it's supposed to be, but I didn't really get that out of it. I thought this was all a bit weird, and while I really enjoyed the kind of discussion that the author brought forward with this one, and definitely does the discussion about black people, particularly women in publishing, or the lack thereof, because the author was actually an editor in one of the big publishing houses in New York. I can't remember which one. I didn't really enjoy the story all that much. It wasn't really a thriller. It didn't feel very thrilling to me, so that was a shame. I gave this one 3 stars. And then finally, I think I read The Twisted Ones, which is a horror book. This is about a girl called Mouse. That's not her real name, but that's her nickname, and she goes to her dead grandmother's house, who used to be a hoarder, and so she has to clear out the house ready for it to be sold or demolished. When she is there, weird things start happening. Some really creepy things start coming out of the woods. I really enjoyed this one for the most part. I did find the big reveal at the end to be quite disappointing, but that tends to be the case with horror books for me. I find that I'm always really creeped out when I don't know what's going on, and it's always the build-up to me that is the creepiest part and the scariest part. So as soon as I found out what was happening, it was just not all that scary anymore. But yeah, I did really enjoy this book. It was a lot of fun to read. I think I gave it 3.5 stars. Maybe, I can't remember. So those are all the books that I read in March. I'm just going to very quickly go through my stats once I've added them up. Okay, so some of these statistics might not add up properly. I've done my best with the maths, but I wasn't really keeping track all that well. So I read a total of 18 books in February, which is kind of mad, but 3 of them were novellas, so makes a bit more sense, but still 15 is really good. I haven't added up the amount of pages that I read, but I did read 16 adult books and 2 YA books, which is a lot of adult books actually, but most of that is Kristin Hannah or Brandon Sanderson, so I guess it kind of makes sense. For genres, I read 3 sci-fi, 3 history books, historical books, sorry, not history, 5 fantasy books, 3 thrillers, 2 horrors, 1 contemporary, 1 non-fiction. Ratings, I had 1 1-star book, 1 2-star book, 7 3-star books, 8 4-star books, and 1 5-star book. 4 of the books or authors were new to me and 3 were debut authors, and I had 1 DNF. So that's how my stats were looking in February. I'm really looking forward to doing March's statistics and then also doing a quarterly stats wrap up, because that's going to go a lot more in depth with kind of the diversity of my reads and the format that I was reading them in, but this is just a very basic look. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. I think this is going to turn out to be a long one considering how many books I had to read. My jaw is starting to hurt from talking too much, so I am going to stop it here. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll speak to you all in the next video. Bye.